don't have a gavel, but it's implied. All right. So will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Como? Oh, she just left.
I think she tried to click on unmute instead hung up.
Yep.
Oh, no.
It's too close to one another, yep. There she is.
There we go. Ms. Como?
Here.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Here.
Mr. Jimenez?
Here.
Ms. Leahy?
Here.
Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Meyer is excused. Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
Thank you.
So a quorum of the Board of Education is present. So the June 22nd, 2020 Board of Education workshop is called to order. We'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board. I would entertain at this time a motion with a second to approve the agenda as submitted unless there is a motion to amend.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the agenda as presented, and we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner? Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Thank you. Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. Okay, so we're going to move on to the information items that we need to get through this evening. So we'll start with a continuation of the discussion that we had last week with regards to potentially forming an ad hoc committee to explore Fund 80 and in particular the contract with the police department, which ends in June of next year. So last week, as was discussed, what I was suggesting is that we form a committee in order to gather some information for board members that have questions about the contract and the relationships between the school district and the SROs. There were some of the board members asked for additional information following that meeting, and also because this was a workshop that was added to our agenda because we just have a number of things to get through between a search and COVID and whatnot. It provides us an opportunity to just chat about that for a little bit before next week when we move back to a regularly scheduled board meeting. So let me just kind of get that started. Again, so what we're really talking about, I see as a two-part process: identifying the questions that board members have with regards to the renewal of a contract, and what the people and organizations that we want to make sure we reach out to in terms of gathering that information. The second part, of course, would if first of all, if the board decides to form the committee in order to pull together those questions and stakeholders, and then ultimately creates a charge to gather that information, then that would be something that we will discuss at a later date. What we're really talking about tonight is the formation of just an initial group to pull together the questions that we've been getting from the community and questions that board members have. I would guess that process might take 2 to 3 weeks, but I'm curious to hear what other board members think about that or questions that you have about that part of this.
So if we make the committee and then we take the 2 to 3 weeks to form the committee, create the questions, etc., that's not necessarily giving a forum to the public during those 2 to 3 weeks, correct? Because that's kind of a timing issue of trying to make that happen. So I just want to clarify that part.
Yeah, it's a great question. Now, this first part is just about just pulling together the questions that the board has. I suppose that there's probably some overlap between the questions. So having an ad hoc committee to kind of like synthesize those questions, I think would make it more explicit so that we're not all over the place with those questions. Yeah,
I agree with that.
yeah, I mean, understand that part of what we're trying to do, right, is put together a process whereby we can get input. I mean, so how do we build a process that's transparent and that people feel that they have an opportunity to provide feedback? I think that'll be helpful if the board is clear, first of all, with what kinds of questions that we have. Are there other questions and comments about that? And again, whether or not folks think that this first part of just pulling the questions together and stakeholders could be done in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think it would be great because some of those emails, they make you think. The posts on Facebook, the emails that have been sent, there's great questions both ways. It's very thought-provoking, makes you question what's going on. So I think bringing those questions together would be a really good idea.
I would agree. I would not want to go into a conversation of this magnitude without having some focus about what it is we are actually trying to accomplish. I think that not having that focus may cause some concerns about what is our true purpose. So having that set explicitly, reviewing the specifics of what it is we want to do. Yeah, I would not want to go into this type of conversation and not have that set ahead of time.
And not only what we want to do, but what we're allowed to do, considering it's Fund 80, and the state defines what we can and cannot do with those types of funds. So that in itself needs to be explained to people who might not understand that.
Right. Yeah, and I guess my apologies. I probably misspoke, but that was intended in my comment.
Thank you,
It's
Ms.
hard to see your face, Juan.
Thank you, Ms. Como, Mr. Jimenez.
I've got a question here. This is Keontae Turner. Hey, I got a question.
Mr. Turner.
That this work should be of the entire board. So I'm a little confused, which I'm not. I agree with everyone, what everyone is saying, but the subcommittee part actually. Can you clarify that for me for a little bit? Because I do believe it's the work of the full board, and I like to have the full board involved in this conversation. The subcommittee just sounds like a few, which it is, and I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, I thank you for the question, Mr. Turner. So, and the opportunity to clarify that. So this would be something that every board member would be, we would solicit feedback from and questions from. You know, initially, one of the things I thought was, I mean, I could just send out an email, right, to all the board members and say, send me your questions. My concern with just doing it that way is that, to your point, I think this is an important discussion. And so having a few folks on the board to then put their heads together and synthesize those questions seems like an opportunity to, provides an opportunity just a step further. So it's not that it's eliminating all members of the board by any means. It's that, in fact, what I imagine what will happen is that individual board members will be, again, asked to, what are your questions, right? So last week was just about me saying, here's some questions I have, here's some questions I'm getting from the community. But as I said, I want to hear your questions. So all board members would take part in the providing that information. All board members would provide input on who it is and what organizations we want to make sure that we are considering. the committee I'm suggesting, their main task would just be to pull that together. Yeah.
Got it.
Is that helpful, Mr. Turner?
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments about that? So if they're not, then when we return to our regular board meeting on July 6th, we'll bring it forth as an action item for that initial committee to do that work. So as I asked last week, if that's something that you would like to serve in that capacity on an ad hoc committee to pull those things together, just let me know, because again, even though I can appoint people, I would rather people first tell me if that's something that they're interested in. Okay.
Hey,
All
Lori.
right. Mr. Spivey, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Have there been any like board members that have expressed like not wanting to do the committee at all? Like to have the ad hoc committee?
I have not heard that there's any board members who are interested in that, but then that's also not information I have solicited. But when it comes forward as an action item, if it is seconded, it would be open for discussion again as well. So this is more about, keeping this on your radar and thinking about it as we get closer to that meeting.
Okay.
Did that answer the question, Mr. Spivey? Oh.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next item that we have is, this is in reference to the changes that we did last week on policies. So thank you for a robust discussion about those changes. There were only a few edits that were suggested by board members, and then I believe Mr. Turner we connected again after the board meeting about the language about cultural competency, and I know Dr. Engel had a couple of suggestions as well. So what you see included here on board docs are just the language from last week with those edits. I don't think, therefore, it requires a larger discussion again, unless someone certainly has a question about the changes. All you're seeing are the is the suggested language from last week with the edits that board members and Dr. Engel suggested. Any questions about that? Okay, so that will then come forward again in July as an action item, and then those changes will become officially part of those policies. Okay, so now something this is not for board members who've been on the board for a little bit. This is not a discussion that's new. This has come up before in the past, and actually is a 2.3 and 2.4 really go together, because 2.4 is the policy, as you saw in review for the meeting tonight, that specifically includes that language of the first board meeting in November will be the academic achievement ceremony. So for our brand new board members, if you're unfamiliar with the academic achievement ceremony, that is something that has historically been held at Viterbo. Ms. Leahy, I'm sure you've been to a number of them as well. So I want to say it was maybe a couple of years ago, and I'm hoping that Mr. Nelson will help me out with the memory here, but I think a couple of years ago, this came forward as a kind of an information gathering topic at a workshop. And then, and what I learned there that I didn't know, even though I'd attended the ceremony a number of times with that, was that this was a board-sponsored event. And, but the board, and Superintendent Nelson, correct me if I'm wrong, it may be a board-sponsored event, but the board doesn't really do the work of the event. The board kind of shows up at the event, and so unless I'm mischaracterizing things, the nature of this discussion was: would the ceremony be best left to each of the high schools to do it as they saw fit. So, you know, instead of this being a board sponsored event, you know, could this return to the high schools for them to figure out? And I believe Superintendent Nelson, you spoke with the principals following those discussions, and do you want to share what the feedback was?
Sure. Thank you. You characterized very well our prior discussions on this. It was something that started with the Board of Education, 30 years ago or so. It has quite a tradition in the school district. But yes, we did actually have a conversation with the high school principals. And to your point, each one of our high schools, it really does have a process in place to recognize high academic achievement on the part of their students. And so we reached out to the principals, and the principals for this particular event said they would very much welcome a board's decision to step away from this and discontinue this particular process, this particular ceremony, not because they don't want to highlight the great things that students are doing, but as you mentioned before, the amount of work that they have to drop and do for something that they feel is also something that they already do in their building, I think would be a solid reason for the board just to reconsider it, put these past 29, 30 years for that ceremony on ice. And I do think that it would be great, given all of the work that has been done, but all of the work that's coming up in the school district, especially as it pertains to social justice and equity, to figure out different ways to celebrate different things. There's still ways to do things. And so maybe you wait a year and then it's another group or administration comes up with another idea about how we could celebrate things in the school district of La Crosse. But for now, my recommendation would be that we put this on hold and we wait for something else to transpire down the road.
It would also seem that in the midst of a global pandemic, that this year might be particularly a good, if we're going to do that, this might be the year to do that. So
should have started there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is questions or comments from? I agree with Superintendent Nelson. In fact, once I kind of learned a little bit more of the history and that it was a board-sponsored event as well, and learned more about it, I think that our principals are aptly equipped to decide how they want to do that within the school. So, are there other discussions or questions that board members may have about the ceremony or opposition, and like you really just want to have the ceremony or whatnot?
I believe we should our principals.
Canty, I think you got cut off just a little bit. Would you repeat that for me?
I believe we should leave it up to our principals to take care of that.
Okay.
I hate the thought of putting an extra burden on the schools to gather the data above and beyond what they already do at the schools. So I think time is best served celebrating their own schools versus trying to appease the board. So I agree with the logic of trying to keep it at the school level.
Yeah, I would also agree. I think that, as you mentioned, given the current pandemic, there may be different ways in which we're going to celebrate and highlight academic achievement. So let's allow our principals that flexibility to figure out what that looks like in this brave new world that we're living in, and see if we come up with better solutions.
I'm all for that. The only thing that I want to make sure that doesn't get lost is some of the publicity and some of the recognition that goes along with it. That we have fine young students in our school district who are doing well, and I would just hate for it to see that we did get no recognition and no publicity in the community about that. But yeah, I think it's fine for the schools to do it the way they want, and maybe they'll invite us and allow us to celebrate with them. But definitely, I would want to see some kind of celebration with in the media or in the community that's put forward, because I think that's really important.
That's what I would say is, they oftentimes invite us to their ceremonies. So if we feel like we want to be a part of it, we certainly always have that opportunity with our principals. They're wonderful about inviting us to their events that they have.
Okay, so I'm not hearing compelling reasons to take that out of the policy. So if we'll turn our attention then to 2.04, that has that particular bylaw on board meetings. I've got it up in front of me. If you can pull it up, you'll see highlighted in yellow in the second paragraph, that's where we have the first meeting in November we dedicated. So what will happen then, or the suggested change, that is stricken from this policy. To Superintendent Nelson's point, I mean, if something changes in the future, that could be revisited, but that would be stricken. There's just in the next paragraph, there's just a verb change there. And then you'll notice that I'm just taking out the gender specific language so we can have more trans inclusive language there. So that would be the suggested edits to that bylaw in light of the removal of that information about the academic achievement ceremony. So are there questions about the suggested changes to that bylaw? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Jimenez?
Pause in between, don't worry. So to that point, then typically we have not had a meeting, of course, on that night. So would you recommend adding a meeting to that Monday night like we normally would have that accordance to our schedule?
I would say let's put that in there, especially because since on I mean, it's very rare occasion we cancel a meeting, but I would rather be in that position than in the position of having to add one if people were not prepared. So if we could just take out that statement and then we'll assume. Thank you, Laura, for that question.
Yep, thank you.
So Laura, I'm gonna rely on you as well for the discussion as we move into GC6E, the annual work plan. Now this has come up for discussion with the board before in relationship to our transition to coherent governance. But the document has not been finalized at this point, and an important reason for that is because we haven't finalized, again, for lack of a better word, the templates around all of our policies. Our discussion last week, the first half of the meeting, as it focused on policy language, was in order to solidify some of that, so those final templates could come forward. So, and Laura, I'm going to ask you to jump in or correct me, but so our discussion about this is really meant as an update to the board this evening, because what we're suggesting is that we wait a little bit before bringing this back to the board to finalize until we see, until there's some discussion from administration as far as weighing in on where they think some of these items should fall within the annual work plan based on those templates. Now, Laura, am I recalling that correctly? Okay. Any discussion about that? Superintendent Nelson, is there anything you want to weigh in about that or?
No, but I appreciate the board's flexibility in allowing administration to take what we have been doing and move it inside of this, knowing that we're going to have to do more and we're going to have to do some changes down the road. I appreciate the flexibility that's there for that. I'm not sure that this was discussed maybe at the last meeting when I was not in attendance, but what's the status of the discussion regarding how, for instance, the results policies will come forward and or the finance policy, little bits of pieces at a time or in one lump sum? I maybe missed that, and I apologize if I did.
No, let's see on the, no, that was, Laura, wasn't that an item that we were going to, that we potentially were going to discuss last week and we kind of moved to this week, the presentation of the budgetary pieces. And I believe we were going to talk with Patty about what worked best for her.
Yes, yep. And Patty sent a very wonderful and thorough response, just explaining how I'm going to sum it up here. So Patty, I'm sorry if I kind of butcher your very thoughtful response, but to make a long story short, the reason why it had been presented throughout the year is because there is just so much information that goes into the whole budget. And so it just has worked out in years past to present it throughout the year along with certain times. So she did give an example of our capital maintenance improvement projects. Usually those start throughout the summer. And so the improvement plan has historically been presented in the month of May in preparation for that. Nothing is specifically acted upon, but it's just an informative report so that the board is kept in the loop of the improvements that are being made within the school district. And so that's just one example of why that report, part of the budget timeline, gets presented come May time. And so I think just the sheer volume, it would be pretty overwhelming to present all in one sitting. And so to my understanding, I don't think it's a burden on anyone if it does get presented throughout the year, just because that is what people are used to. But it ultimately is, of course, the board's decision on what you would like to see. And so if it would be preferred to be moved into one chunk or even, let's say 2 chunks, for example, then I'm sure there could be adjustments made to accommodate that.
Thank you, Ms. Steigerwald. So for board members, the perspective that I shared on this was that, I mean, whatever works for Ms. Spring is fine with me. I don't have any opposition to that. Any opposition from any board members?
No, I think that's a good idea because we don't want to try to tackle all those things at one meeting or even 2. I think separating them out, we can focus on them a little more, especially for board members. When you're first on the board, there's a lot to talk about or to figure out how the funds are coming in and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a good idea to continue having elongated process, because then we're allowed to sit back and thoroughly look at things versus trying to get it all done in one or 2 nights.
Superintendent Nelson, I think the second part of that, or the first part perhaps of that, was about the remaining templates.
No, the other part I was wondering about was the results policies and how
those
would come to it, or whether those will be done throughout the year or also in one night.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I'd rather wait and get some direction from administration on. So even though the board may, approve GP60, I think that this is something that we should take some direction from the administration on as far as how best to do that. So we can certainly add some, have some guidance, provide some guidance on that. My hope is that by the end of the summer, we can hopefully get these finalized pieces in place and get some feedback from administration on this, because I know that can be anxiety producing as well, to be in limbo, both for the board and then the administration trying to figure out those pieces. So like putting a pin in it is kind of what we're doing at the moment.
Got it.
Is that, do you have anything to, any opposition to that or anything to share about that, or are you good with that, Superintendent Nelson?
I just think that just given the way, especially test results come our way, if to wait until November, because it's going to be part of the superintendent's evaluation to do R2 or R3, to take those results as they come along, so that the board has an opportunity to get a good discussion about the results, even if you might get them in October or you might get them in February or March. But then you could still spend a good amount of time at that first meeting in November, or whenever the case might be, to discuss then whether the superintendent is making progress or not. But it'll be based on several reports that you've heard throughout the year. And I think that would help expedite, but at the very moment, it would really help board members get into depth on some of the questions that may come up as those results come in.
Great, thank you. All right, so the next item.
Before we move on,
yeah, please.
just one thing I want to share is my hope is that in this first year of moving to coherent governance that we have flexibility between each other, between administration and the board, right? I mean, we can put a pin in and say this is the date that we would like to see this report, but that date may not fly but as we get closer, right? And so having some reasonableness between us to say, you know, this may not be the right time, but we will have that for you at X date, so that we can, in the next year, have a more structured work plan that will make more sense. I think we have to live through a year and figure out where things fall so that we're comfortable as we move forward.
And to that point, Mr. Jimenez, you actually just kind of jog something for me. As board members, you will recall that I think the last item that we discussed last week was just the potential of adding a governance officer. And just recently, Laura and I have received some information on professional development, which is kind of feeding into this last point on the information items for tonight, and that's going to be happening in September. So as I said last week, since there was no opposition from the board, that I would bring that back forward to the board at, in terms of action item for adding that position to the slate of officers. So that's just going to happen a little bit later. And I think Laura, we talked about adding it in August, that will come back around. So your comment, Juan, just reminded me of that. So to that point then about professional development. So that's the next piece of this: parameters on board professional development, convention reports to the full board. So this discussion has to do with what do we want expectations to be when board members attend events for professional development. I have, in my time on the board, I've seen everything from like a full-on PowerPoint presentation from Ms. Como to a few, like, just from, I think most folks some key points of things they wanted to share. And in addition to that, and Laura, please correct me if I'm wrong, also whether or not that was just going to be part of a consent agenda, that we were literally going to have an information item. So let's just start maybe with the first part of that. What do board members think that there should be as far as any expectation with reporting back to the board when it comes to professional development?
I think that we have to. I don't think there's an option there. If we are going to have any monies expended for professional development, we should be bringing that back to our other colleagues and to the community to share what we've learned. So I just feel like we have to have something. My thinking would be that it may make more sense to have that presentation during a workshop rather than a board meeting, but I think either one would work, just so long as we are bringing back that knowledge and sharing that, because otherwise then what was the point of getting the professional development?
Yeah, and so to be clear, we're definitely going to have board members present on it, but it's a matter of how do we want people to present, right? So I would definitely like some feedback from all of you on that. I'm not going to advocate for like no disrespect, Ms. Como. I'm not going to advocate for like everyone has to do a PowerPoint, but how would board members like that? Would they like it as just part of a consent agenda and we just read it on our own, right? Like that's one option, that it is presented as Mr. Jimenez said, and then we just read it on our own. Or do we think it literally needs to be an information item in which there's some kind of oral presentation on it? I don't have a feeling either way. I mean, I could be persuaded either way.
I would say that, of course, we definitely need to be transparent and letting the board know letting the community know what we learned. I am not a PowerPoint. I would definitely not do that. As I've seen it happen, actually, we've shared at the board table, and I thought that would completely suffice, but I am not opposed to actually doing it in a workshop, nor am I opposed to actually writing a full piece about my experience. I do believe the last time I presented on something, it was very lackluster, and it was because we had so many things to do at the board table, and I felt rushed. Okay, this is what happened. These are the key points. I really would actually like to go above just the key point of things that stood out to me at the conventions and whatnot. But I'm not a huge fan of doing like a full-fledged presentation or anything like that.
I think if we do it in the workshop, we can actually have more discussion on it. I remember one year we went to the convention and Brad and I were both really excited about Subway, actually being able to have a Subway within a school. And we were like, Central, they have all of these restaurants around them and Logan doesn't. Wouldn't it be cool to have like a Subway that the kids own within the school? And we brought it back. And I think that the passion that can come with it is expressed clearly through voice versus black and white. I feel like just hyping it isn't going to give that excitement that might happen. Or when I went to another one, it was what we did within the presentation that excited me about drawing what we thought of the person next to us. That's not something that I can put in a paragraph and have you say, yeah, that's something we should do within the school, or kids should play more because this, and you can see the elation on my face versus me with 5 exclamation marks in my paragraph. So I agree with it to at least a workshop to say, hey, this is what I learned. This is what I think would be really cool in the La Crosse School District if we can implement it. I know we can't implement everything, but even if we can't implement it, we might be able to glean off of it and create our own cool project within our own school district.
And before Mr. Spivey speaks, I'm sorry, I know you want to speak, sorry. I would like to say that we have to be very cognizant that all people don't express themselves the same. So a paragraph might do it. And some people might want to do a PowerPoint and get up and present and be in order. So I think we need to put that into context as well. But I totally agree with Don and Mark.
No, that's actually what I was going to say. I definitely agree with it being at the workshop so that we can open and have more discussion. But I think in terms of the format in which a person chooses to present, probably shouldn't be something formalized. I mean, we could say, here are the 3 options or whatever the case may be. But I think it's really important to recognize that some folks might be more oral or orator, right? And other folks might be less right, and so on and so forth. And I don't think a consent agenda in terms of everybody just reading it really gives the people to some degree the respect, right? In terms of they took their time, they went to these conferences, and we just wrote something, and then now we read it and then just kind of move along. I think that it requires a little bit more time. And then the other thing that I was going to say, to take it a step further, and I don't know as a new board member, what this conversation will what this will mean, but I oftentimes look at it from a standpoint of you can't send someone to do professional development and not have some sort of requirement with them when they come back, right? And I think that the presentation piece is nice because you get to explain it, but I feel like there should be some sort of action item behind it, if possible, right? Where we say, you've been to this conference, what did you learn? Not only what did you learn, but what will you be doing with the information you learned? And some sort of expectation on the back end, I think, is going to be really important for that.
I think it also depends on the topic of the professional development. A presentation on school law is not going to be as riveting or as easy to present than maybe a presentation on the intricacies of coherent governance, right? I mean, I think those two things are significantly different, and because of that, I may be a good presenter, but I'm going to put y'all to sleep if I'm going to do something on school law, right? So, and that one is probably just. So, I think that we not only do we have to take into consideration the person, but also the topic, and basically I think we just need to do justice to both.
Sure.
And I have to defend my PowerPoint presentation. I didn't have anybody guiding me, so I just did the computer girl thing to do
Good
something
job.
on the computer. So,
I have to say, I think I was a brand new board member. That was the first time that a board member had to give a presentation on professional development. And I was like, wow, this is what all board members do. Okay, so let me just mirror back to you what I think I'm hearing, and please let me know if I have this wrong. So first, I think what I hear is that we want this to be an information item, not something that's just part of the consent agenda when people attend professional development, but that we want some flexibility in terms of how it is that they provide that information item. Is that correct?
And at the workshop.
Well, actually, okay, so hold that
Or we
thought.
don't have an information item there, I suppose.
Okay, yeah, hold that thought for just 1 second. Okay, so I think that this is fine, and having that flexibility is just fine. It's come up as a question because people have asked, right? Like, so I'll go and attend this conference or the state convention. What should I expect as a board member in terms of when I come back and present this? I don't have any issue with any of this. Mr. Corbett. So I wanted to come back because I know this is, I want to talk about the language of workshop for just a moment, because this is something that Superintendent Nelson and Dr. Engel and I have discussed earlier this, and Laura and I have had a number of discussions about, because we have talked about in next month transitioning to a model, and have been utilizing the language of workshop because that's how the model is, that's how other districts have discuss this as well. But I think that there is a concern here around semantics that I want to make sure we're clear about, because historically, and someone can correct me on this, or at least in the last several years, when there have been workshops, there have been, like tonight, something that, okay, we've got items piling up we need to discuss, or superintendent has had some things they need to discuss, and it has not had a formal agenda, and so on. We've had a couple of regularly scheduled workshops in our calendar, but ad hoc ones happen as well. That is not what's happening next month. We are still having regular board meetings on the 1st and 3rd of the month. The difference is that the 1st of the month is more information heavy in preparation for the meeting that happens on the 3rd of the month. But I'm concerned about, even if it is a matter of semantics, I'm concerned that language may appear confusing. So the only place it appears actually is in our schedule, our board schedule for this coming year. And that went out, Laura, a month or so ago, I think. So next month, I'm gonna bring that forward just so that we strike that language of workshop, just so that it's not confusing. We are not changing like regular board meetings, just a little more information heavy on the front end so that we have a little more consistency between meetings. That's it. And so since the word had been used, I was going to bring this up next month, but there's no better time than the present. So any questions about that?
okay. I think the only reason I would say workshop is because exactly what you said, is a more information based. So to me, presenting is information and not necessarily making a vote or doing something. So that was where I got the workshop logic from.
Sure. Now, Laura, the other part of this discussion, the parameters of professional development, did this have to do with monies for professional development, or am I misremembering?
Yes, monies and just different opportunities that are available that some board members might not be aware of, and just kind of talking about what the board wants to have as the expectation. So currently, just for an example, most board members are are encouraged to attend the state convention. It's a pretty well-rounded sort of professional development opportunity, but that's just one opportunity. And so what do we really want the board to focus on as far as the various opportunities that are available to us, whether it be through WASDA or WASB, Aspen Group, just to name a few. And then also the monies that go into it too, which this year is going to be, I'll just be honest, I've seen the dollars. This year is going to be tight, but I think we already anticipated that.
Yeah, and I've asked this question before, but I'm hoping that either you, Laura, or Randy, or Patty can, because I think the answer I got was there's not specific money set aside for board professional development. Am I wrong about that?
Yes, but no. There is, but now you have to remember that my knowledge of the historical budget is very slim because my previous counterpart was the primary budget developer. And so what I gathered from creating this current fiscal year budget, which is now ending, it was very much based on, well, these are the opportunities the board has done in the past, and it cost approximately this much to do it this past year. So then we base the budget off of that.
Okay. So just to be clear for the board members, I think professional development for board members is so important. It is true that we even if things weren't tight, that we don't have a limitless budget in terms of providing professional development for board members. I believe historically, and again, someone let me know if this is not right. We've tried, if possible, for everybody to have some kind of professional development, if it were possible for that to happen. So I know in the past, especially serving on the governance committee, questions have come up about, are we going to draw hard and fast lines between you can only attend this once, or you can't attend that, and we have really in the last year or so treated that on as it's come up. And there certainly are opportunities within the state for professional development. I found wisdom sharing last year to be very helpful. I don't know, Laura, if you want to weigh in on that, or Dr. Harsey's thoughts about that. It might have been particularly helpful because we were just transitioning to coherent governance. But I don't know where to, at this point, without seeing those what dollars we're looking at, and with COVID-19. And I mean, this year, the national convention was supposed to be in Chicago, so it's close, right? And then, it got canceled. So I don't know if we need to say more about this at this juncture, unless, Laura, you're waiting on something from us before maybe circling back around to this at a later date.
I guess my concern is just from freshly looking at the budget for this year, I really don't know where dollars are going to come from for PD for this year, unless we were to cut other things. Just to give a very broad overview, a large part of the budget is board docs, paying for board docs, so we can't eliminate board docs. Another large piece of it is WASB, or WASB membership, and then legal fees. And so those big chunks right there. Oh, and then the fourth big chunk is our Aspen Group contract, the remaining months of the Aspen Group contract. And so just from those, I don't really have much wiggle room. And so it would be a matter of looking at some, what I say, pennies as far as like subscriptions go, to maybe some publications to try to shift money toward professional development. But I'm a little concerned with the budget this year that we're not going to have a lot to give. And so I don't know how my question then from the board is, how much do I need to be looking at pinching some of the pennies that I maybe have wiggle room to give dollars to professional development?
The only professional development item, as you know, that you and I have discussed as of late is is wisdom sharing, in the sense that the reason, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we were going to bring the governance officer position back for the discussion and action in August was because. So now maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I think it's apropos to this discussion, which is. Last year, the only people, again, who went to wisdom sharing were Troy and Laura and I. It's hard for me to imagine that you could have someone serve as the governance officer and not attend that or have professional development around that in order to effectively carry out the role, just because we're all sort of learning the process as we go. But that said, with regard to the contract we already have in place with Randy and Linda, I could see us absolutely utilizing that contract to provide that professional development, particularly for new board members, and with regards to who would serve, whether that's Juan, in terms of the governance officer. So I think we could definitely use those monies for professional development this year. And state convention and otherwise may not happen or may happen virtually, depending on what happens with the global pandemic. Other thoughts that board members have at this, or things on your agenda, or excuse me, on your radar that you're like, oh, I really think we ought to consider, as opposed to maybe put off for a year?
Well, I just think that, this is going to be a tough year to look at a budget, because the last time we did professional development, there was some travel associated costs, right? Flights, hotels, etc. This is a new world we're living in. For all we know, a lot of this professional development may be virtual, and so we wouldn't have to pay for some of those costs. So our dollars may stretch just in virtue of that. So I think we just need to fly by the seat of our pants for a while on this and figure out, be judicious about what it is we want to do and what we think we want to accomplish as a board. What professional development do we feel is beneficial, and then just go from there.
I should say that we are discussing August, I believe, to connect with. So speaking of travel and those kinds of limitations, Juan, more than likely it will be virtual, but to connect with Randy and Linda, right?
Yep.
Yeah. In August of sometime. We have kind of put that off till then because we have a new superintendent coming in next month, and we needed to finalize some of our policy language this month. So August is what we're looking towards figuring out. So definitely some professional development coming in then. Mm-hmm. And we definitely need to make full use of the contract that we have with them.
Agreed.
Lori, can you clarify something for me? Consensus that, can you hear me?
I can.
Beautiful. Did we come to the consensus that we will have one governance officer? I thought maybe we talked about the concept of us all serving in that role.
The conversation at the end of yes. So at the end of last meeting, I know you were traveling, so there was some cutoff there with So at the last meeting, the discussion was we looked at the policy from, was it DeForest, I think, who has a governance officer and their role description, and talked about adding one governance officer to our slate of officers. So you would have president, vice president, treasurer, clerk, and then governance officer and board secretary. And I think the discussion was around, is that forever, or is that something we want to do in the first few years of coherent governance? That was my recollection. If anyone else has any different recollection, please.
I thought we spoke to it being so new that it would be kind of hard for one governance officer to do all of that work by him or herself. I thought we spoke to that many meetings ago. But okay, so I dropped off that call, so I guess I didn't hear that. But to my recollection, I thought we talked about it actually being a rotated kind of situation, a rotated position.
I think that was in the discussion. Okay, so two things to that piece. Keontae. The first was that's kind of the nature of why I was talking about where we would bring it back in August, because I agree that there needs to be some professional development around that role, because it is new to the board. The piece I think that we were talking about rotating was, in case we didn't have a governance officer, would we rotate the debriefing portion of meetings?
Thank you.
That it wouldn't just be the president who did that, but other folks. But if there was a governance officer, that would be something that is that the recollection of other board members as well in that discussion?
It'd be their responsibility for the debris.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that role would be elected every May, just like the others.
It still would rotate. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about that?
Well, back to the professional development piece, we have to remember there is like the delegate who has to go and represent the board on the voting questions for WASB. So I mean, there are some things that we're pretty much committed to that we need to make sure that we have capability of affording and being able to fund it.
Are there any other than, thank you, Brad, are there any other folks who are serving in those capacities on the board? Like, I know Brad's the delegate. Is there anyone else that we need to be aware of? Definitely has to have some monies. Because Dawn, you don't for your role, do you? Need
not for C4, not for board clerk. I went to my professional development 2 years ago, and we did a virtual one, so there's nothing that I have to travel for.
Okay, so we need some money somewhere for because even if it's virtual, I'm sure there's going to be some cost associated with that. Okay. Any other things that we need to have, that Laura needs to have on the radar?
I do just want to note that Troy Harsey had stated in the comments, noting about the Coherent Governance Consortium that we have within Wisconsin. And at least last year they offered a PD opportunity where Randy and Linda did actually come and hosted a brief workshop. And so, Randy, do you know, are they trying to do anything further except for is it Wednesday? Is that pretty much it? That's the virtual opportunity from the consortium group?
Right. I think there's one on Wednesday. They're talking about reorganizing it in a couple of different ways as well. Okay. I have not seen the most recent plan in that, but to that whole point, I would say that the wisdom sharing, which I have not attended, but my conversation with Dr. Cooper-Stoll, Dr. Harsey, and Laura, it was beneficial based on what I hear. So Wisconsin has many more school districts that do coherent governance than many other states. And so it's always been my belief that there's no reason that we can't host our own wisdom sharing here in Wisconsin, and especially if it needs to be done virtually because of the current pandemic. It should be no problem to have Randy and Linda join not just our school district and our Board of Education members, although they're prepared to do that at any time whenever you want to schedule that, but just to bring that consortium. It's about 12 school districts that are working on this in various degrees of sophistication. But I think we've relied on several of them. We've just a lot of connecting that's been going on to bring forward the R's and the OE's for the board to consider. So I just would encourage the board and Dr. Engel moving forward to take the lead on coherent governance, to be able to bring forward that consortium, to work closely with that consortium, and maybe run our own wisdom sharing conference here in Wisconsin. There's no reason that we can't be out in front of that. And maybe just given the few months here that we have left in their contract, maybe there's an opportunity to not just have them work with the school district of La Crosse, but when they say that we're going to come and work with you in August or in January, whatever the date is, that we invite the other members of the consortium so that others can take advantage of that, because it does allow us all to have to bring maybe some dollars to that, and maybe do that cheaper than it might be if we had to travel to a wisdom sharing in a different state. So that's just my thought.
I will say, when we went to San Diego, I noticed there were a number of people from Wisconsin that were there. So I couldn't agree more about the importance. Honestly, and Dr. Harsey and Ms. Steigerwald may feel differently, but I think the benefit of it was just being able to talk to other board members, not to discount the work that Randy and Linda do, but the benefit was talking to other folks who were doing this work and saying, hey, how do you do this in your district? Here's what we're struggling with, and so on. Okay, Laura, any other things that we need to discuss with regards to professional development at this point?
Nope, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
This all sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Can I ask for clarification, because we kind of bounced to like maybe 5 or 6 conversations within that time frame?
Sure.
Going back to the initial thought around school board members and the presentations that they'll be doing to the school board about professional development. So it's pretty much safe to say it'll happen in that informative session?
In the what session?
The informative.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so if we're going to bring it forth as an information item, we'll probably see it at a first meeting of the month then. Yep.
Oh, okay. And then that's also when we'll kind of discuss the format of the presentations and all that stuff too.
Well, what we'll probably do, I mean, just off the top of my head, is then when we have board members who know that they're going to be attending, I think we would just have a conversation then about, since we're saying if we're going to keep it flexible, right? If we're going to keep it flexible in terms of how board members want to present that, we can just have a conversation with the individual board member, and then I can plan the agenda, knowing that.
Okay.
Does that answer that question?
It does.
Okay.
I just, because I was following along, but then it was like,
Sure.
As a new person, and I'm like, we on like 7 different conversations. I need a recap.
Yes. Okay, so quick recap. We're gonna do it the first meeting of the month, and it's at the discretion of the board member. And you can just tell us, Laura and I, ahead of time, and we'll plan accordingly in the agenda. And also, anytime that you have questions as a new board member, like flag us down, so that we can make sure that we're addressing those questions. Any other questions or comments on that before we move to announcements?
I just want to make sure everyone saw Dr. Lehucky's note here in the comments that Dr. Ginger Rogers, he said, has done a 4-part webinar for coherent governance, and that is available on the Aspen Group's website.
Okay. She was one of the speakers, I'm sure, Laura, you remember, at Wisdom Sharing, and I thought her session was very informative. I really appreciated it. Okay, so we're going to move to announcements if there are no more questions or comments. So tonight is Superintendent Nelson's last board meeting with us. And with the global pandemic, we have lost the opportunity to have so many ceremonial types of things that allow us to really mark some of these transitions. And so normally we'd have a retirement dinner and so on. And here's what we have, a virtual meeting. But here we are. So I've asked the board members to share what they, things that they might want to share. I just want to say that especially as an educator, what a hard job, what a noble job, what a rewarding job. And I know that you have had a very long and esteemed career in education. And, part of our jobs being board members has been made all the more easy because of your leadership on your end. And it's something that I really appreciate. I think one of my favorite moments, probably with you over the years, since we also worked together some before I was ever a board member, was this past January when you were recognized at the United Way luncheon because you didn't know you were going to be recognized. And I know you, and I know that you over-prepare for remarks, and it was an opportunity where you just had to get up and like speak from the heart. And that was probably one of my favorite times that I saw you actually talk. And so I'm gonna open it up for other board members who I'm sure probably have some messages for you as well.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chianti, go ahead.
No, mine will be very, very short. Thank you for being a mentor. Thank you for being a leader in our community and working to ensure our young kids achieve academic success. And thank you again for your partnership in building strong relationships in our community. And I hope you really enjoy yourself.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump off of Dr. Cooper-Stoll's comment about catching you with your guard down. And I'm pretty sure you know what this is about. Years ago, before I was on the board, I was part of district-wide parent, and Mr. Nelson was the associate superintendent, and I came up with a icebreaker where we took the superintendent and the associate superintendent, and we had two groups of people, and we basically mummified them and wrapped them in toilet paper, and whoever could make it stay up and then have that person get out of that. It was supposed to be tape, but we didn't want to ruin their suits, so we made it toilet paper. That vision of seeing him wrapped in toilet paper and allowing us to do it, it was just very heartwarming and fun. And that's the feeling I've always gotten from you is, yes, you have to make some very serious decisions, and we appreciate that, but you are always heartwarming and fun, and you engage with all of us and touch all of our hearts. So thank you.
Did you take a picture?
No, we didn't. No, sorry.
That better not go up anyplace.
You painted a picture and didn't even need PowerPoint.
I just want to say I missed that district-wide parent meeting. I've been a member for many years too, and I can't believe I missed that one. But I want to say what was always evident in all the years and being part of district-wide parent is how your commitment to the kids of the school district of La Crosse. And thank you so much for what you've done. And over your years here, you have certainly made a difference. And your passion for education just always stood out. And I always loved going to district-wide parents just because every time after I left, I felt better about our school district because how you talked about the district. So thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll add on to Brenda's when talking about concern for students. I saw that many times, Randy, and there were a couple times when you really showed your passion. And I was grateful for that, and always knew that you had the district in its right mind, or you were just focused on what was good for the district because of what was going to be good for our kids. And those of us who are in this, I think most of us, if not all of us, are in it for that. I also want to talk about your social justice and equity program, how you brought that forward to the front for us to get started, and to realize that there's not going to be an end to it, that we're always going to be learning. And I thank you for your leadership in getting it going and getting people to think about issues and to talk about them and to try to do better and to eventually succeed to do better. And then I want to mention your communication. I don't think I've ever been blindsided by something that's happened in the district, which is, I mean, that's 5 years that I've been on. That says a lot because you've always been on target and on task to let us know as a board member what the heck is going on. So if it's an incident at Lincoln or if it's an incident at another school, before we hear about it in the media or before somebody starts mouthing off on Facebook or whatever, we knew the situation was unfolding, and we knew about it as much as that you could give us. So I appreciate that, and just want to wish you and Lynn the best. Take some time for yourselves. And as a former chancellor once told me, she loved retirement because she could actually go to meetings that she wanted to go to. And then she said, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that," but we got the gist of what she meant. So thank you, Randy, and best of luck with Lynn, and you having a great retirement.
Thanks, Brad.
Yep.
I also, I hate to say this with Dr. Engel part of the meeting, but it is hard to imagine that anyone could give the weekly announcements as well as you always have. So, you know, very, very professional sounding weekly announcements. I'm going to turn it over to you now in case you have any for announcements, if you have any. I don't know if you have any.
You know, those weekly announcements, Dr. Cooper-Stoll, I do check to see how many people read them. And it's a good day when maybe 2 or 3 people have actually opened up that email. So I do have a couple of announcements.
Well,
first of all,
those to say they're usually fairly lengthy. So, you know, people, when I play them, usually my whole family hears them. So they also complimented you on how professional you are on the announcement.
Agreed on that.
Thank you. So a couple of announcements that I have for you here, student announcements here at the end of the year. A student, 8th grade student from LDI, Carter Mandel. He was recently awarded honorable mention. There's 5,400 entries into a national competition. It's a video competition at C-SPAN. It's a student competition through C-SPAN, 5,400 entries. And he, I believe, received a runner-up, if I'm not, honorable mention he received for his entry, his video entry, which was titled, "We're Here, We're Queer, We Need to Know More." So congratulations to Carter for your work on that and that recognition. And then I'd also mention another student of ours, Caden Hansen from our school district. He's recently been the recipient of $1,500 Wallace E. Zastro Award Scholarship, which is sponsored by the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials. The scholarship is in honor of Joel Advina, who this year really got the big statewide award. But Joe selected Caden to receive that scholarship, and we are really proud of Joe, of course, and the great work that he does in buildings and grounds in our school district, but really extremely proud of Caden and that honor that he has for that scholarship through Joe. So those are my 2 announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Yeah.
So I know I'm not a board member, but I'm wondering, because I've had a very close relationship with Superintendent Nelson, if I might be able to just say a word or two here.
Of course you can.
Thank you. So I think you had mentioned this, Dr. Cooper-Stoll, that he's had a long, illustrious career in public education, approaching 40 years. I don't know if everybody's well aware of that. That's a lot of years of service to children and families. He came to the school district of Crosse in 2008, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent Nelson, as the Associate Superintendent of Instruction. And then in 2011, of course, Superintendent. And I've heard a lot of Superintendent Nelson's stories over the years, but everything he's said is his pathway. He never intended to become a superintendent. But his teachers back in Cambridge, Minnesota, had kind of planted this seed about being an educator. And the way they did that really was, and he'll tell you this a lot, is they just never let him fall through the cracks. And many times he said to be, in many ways, they saved him. And it really formed a lot of his philosophies about education. And so, a couple of the things that he will talk about a lot, if you've been with him for any amount of time, and they certainly permeated the district, is phrases like he wants to enfranchise the disenfranchised. He wants to focus on relationships. In fact, to the point that's never been he's never wavered from the importance of relationships. If you've heard opening speeches at the beginning of the year, he's focused on that. At Rebuilding for Learning, he's focused on the power of relationships. It's really been foundational to everything that he has discussed. His theory about, if children and or families fall, it's not good enough just to have a safety net. He talks about having a trampoline. He wants it woven so tightly that folks can bounce back up and get back into the game. These are some of the foundational pieces that he's talked about and all the time that I've been able to work alongside of him. And one of the things that actually Dr. Engel and I were just talking about the other day is his amazing power to collaborate in order to get resources for our school district. Take the Hamilton project alone, working with the city of La Crosse, the BGC, Gunderson, and that's just one example of allocating, securing resources, telling the district's narrative and story. And that has been happening for years behind the scenes to ensure that children and families, our schools, have the resources we need for instructional programs, for rebuilding for learning, for materials, grants, trainings, so many things. In fact, just this last week, he was meeting with another potential investor on this very thing, trying to secure funds that aren't in the budget to help propel programs and efforts forward. To Randy, the role of the superintendency is and will always be about service. And Randy, I just want to thank you for the service that you've provided the school district of La Crosse, the larger La Crosse community, for allowing all of us to dream and believe and achieve. And I just want to tell you, it's been my honor, my great honor to work alongside of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harsey. Are there any other announcements this evening?
Could I add another thing for Randy?
Of course you can.
Yeah, Randy. So, so what I specialize in, or something that I think I'm really good at, is I'm really good at listening to people and knowing like what they say and how they say it, and like if it comes from the heart or if it actually just comes because they want to say it, right? And a lot of superintendents, they're kind of like politicians, right? Where they just say things because it's pretty, right? And it sounds nice. But when I hear you say things and the way you explain things and the way we talk, whether it's your weekly announcements or whether you're talking to students and parents or teachers, you truly say from the heart. And so, so I want to thank you for that. You're an honest man and you're an honest person and you truly say what you mean and you say from the heart.
Thank you, Gilly.
Yes, thank you for that.
Any other final announcements for tonight? Well, I know that Superintendent Nelson would like to drag this meeting out as long as possible since it's its absolute last one with us, but I am going to adjourn it if there are no other comments or questions. All right.
For all the mornings of the coffee, Mr. Nelson, and talking to me and getting me through a lot of tough stuff. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, County. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for a productive meeting. Laura, I think we got a lot of things off the list that we needed to talk to. So the last couple of workshops, folks, just thank you for your time and your consideration and your work to get us through all of these issues that may seem like minor kinds of things, but we need to get off the list. So, all right, folks, have a good week, and I'll see you on the 6th for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Good one.